In the world of startups, a company's CEO or founder is meant to stick around with the company until it's worth a substantial amount of money, either following the successful launch of its first product, an acquisition by a rival firm, or some other event that results in a major windfall for all who were there at the start, like, an old-fashioned IPO. When a company's CEO or another high-level executive leaves before any of those major events happen, well, you know something is up, because that person is opting to cut and run before the company in question has a chance to earn any substantial value. Or perhaps, they're leaving just before the company crashes and burns in an attempt to get out before things get dire and the company goes under. So when we heard yesterday that Steve Burns, former CEO of Workhorse and founder and CEO of Lordstown Motors, had resigned his position, as well as company CFO Julio Rodriquez, you can probably guess what kind of conversation happened in our channel production meeting. Especially since last week, Lordstown was warning the US Securities and Exchanges Commission that it was running out of funds and may not be a going concern in the near future. With Lordstown still clinging to its promise of somehow producing vehicles this year, even though it's stated multiple times it currently lacks the funds to do so, we've got to ask what lies in store for the future of Lordstown. I'm going to explain the details of this announcement, explain why I'm not surprised that we're now at this point in the company's history, and ask for what's next for the company, and of course, its endurance pickup truck. First, let's look at some of the facts around the resignation. According to the most recent filing made by Lordstown, stock symbol RIDE, or at least the most recent at the time of writing this script and recording this video, both Steve Burns, CEO and founder of Lordstown, and Julio Rodriquez, CFO of Lordstown, have resigned, effective immediately, quote, pursuant to mutual agreement with the company. This is an important distinction, as it suggests that while officially, yes, on paper, both these executives technically resigned, it was a decision that may or may not have been assisted by the rest of the board of directors at Lordstown. Don't think, though, that this particular resignation will leave either executive with nothing to show for it. Attached to the SEC filing in question are exhibits numbered 10.2 and 10.3, which detail the termination agreements for Burns and Rodriguez respectively. Burns' agreement states that he will receive a total of $750,000 from the company, paid in 18 equal monthly installments. That's $41,000 per month, gross, between now and the end of December 2022. Rodriguez, meanwhile, will receive $200,000 split over just 6 equal monthly installments, equivalent to a mere $33,000 gross per month between now and the end of the year. He will also get to benefit from continued vesting of some outstanding stock options with an exercise price per share equal to $1.79. These are due to be fully vested in November this year, which, assuming the company is still around in November, could maybe result in a tidy windfall in the future. I'm no expert in the matter of executive termination agreements, and I'll grant that I have no doubt that such figures are fairly normal. Please do let me know below if I'm wrong. But for a company that was warning everyone just last week that it was worried about its future viability as a going concern, that's one heck of a golden parachute. And yes, I am biting my tongue here because this is the way I avoid getting myself into trouble. But hey, as part of their agreement, there's also a 2-year non-competition and non-solicitation agreement and a perpetual confidentiality and non-disparagement obligation. In other words, neither man can work in the industry for a rival firm or set up one themselves for 2 years, and they're never allowed to badmouth Lordstown or share any of its confidential information. That, though, to be fair, is also pretty standard for this level of contract. Replacing Burns, albeit in a temporary capacity until a permanent CEO is found, is Angela Strand, company director since October last year and lead independent director at the firm since April this year. She is no stranger to executive roles, having held many C-level positions over the years. She also happens to currently hold the role of chairperson of the Compensation Committee and member of the Nominating Corporate Governance Committee of Nuve Holdings. And if you recognise that name, it's a California-based company that specialises in vehicle-to-grid technology. Prior to this role, Angela Strand was founder and senior executive of Change, a joint venture between Smith Electric Vehicles and FDG Electric Vehicles, as well as a founder of In Charge, a quote, vehicle infrastructure solutions provider. Prior to these roles in the EV world, she had a long career in the medical device, biotech and health industries, and she also happened to be vice president of Workhorse Group, yes, the other electric vehicle company that Steve Burns founded and then left to found Lordstown between 2017 and 2018. Her appointment is accompanied by the temporary appointment of Becky Roof as interim CFO. As part of her agreement, Lordstown will engage the global consulting firm she's managing director of, named Alex Partners LLP. Roof will be paid $1,200 per hour, so $48,000 per week, assuming she works full-time. I doubt she will, for her role as interim CFO, and Lordstown has agreed to engage the services of other Alex Partners LLP employees as requested by Ms. Roof. Finally, Lordstown's Chief Interim Officer, Jane Riston Parsons, who's held the role since April this year, is becoming the company's Chief Operating Officer. All three women will receive stock options as part of their new positions, the value of which, obviously, will depend on what happens in the next few months. For a company that said last week it wasn't sure if it could keep going on as a going concern, it is certainly optimistic to expect that these stock options will be worth anything in the near future. And to be honest, I am not surprised we are at this point in Lordstown's story. So let's look at the company's overall history. It's not actually all that old, having been founded in 2018 by then Workhorse CEO Steve Burns. While Burns continued his role at Workhorse until 2019, Lordstown Motors appears to have been set up to allow Workhorse to ditch development of its W15 range-extended pickup truck to save Workhorse money while allowing the truck to live on under a different name with a different company. Although Lordstown was created in 2018, the Workhorse W15 carried on in development for a little while before Lordstown then signed an agreement with Workhorse to license its IP to use as a base for the endurance pickup. I'll come to that in a moment. The W15 had originally debuted several years prior to Lordstown's creation, and when Bengt Halverson drove a prototype in 2017 for Car and Driver, he commented that the vehicle was very early in its development. He noted that the truck felt perky off the line, but also said that the interior was, quote, roughed in, and noted that most of the gauges and dials were non-functional. When Trucks.com drove the Workhorse W15 in 2019, around the same time Workhorse announced it was ceasing development of the vehicle in order to work on building electric vans, and by the way, Workhorse was having its own financial issues at the time, the website criticised the truck's unfinished feel and underpowered braking response. Which, of course, brings us to Lordstown. In 2019, after Burns had left Workhorse, still without a vehicle to show to the public, it was announced by President Trump that Workhorse would be buying the former GM Lordstown production facility. The agreement was signed in May 2019, but the sale didn't happen until November of the same year. Except it wasn't Workhorse buying the facility, it was Lordstown. Workhorse lost several $100 million in 2019, so it wasn't in a place to buy the facility for the $20 million asking price. And frankly, neither was Lordstown. So rather than Lordstown ponying up the funds itself, which it didn't have, General Motors gave Lordstown a $50 million line of credit in order to underwrite the deal, which also gave Lordstown some extra capital to help get its feet on the ground. That's right, GM loaned Lordstown $50 million in order to make it possible for GM to sell Lordstown its then shuttered production facility. That, frankly, was the second of many warning bells for me, the first being the fact that at the time Lordstown did not have a vehicle to actually produce at the facility. That factor wouldn't get resolved until March 2020 when Lordstown announced it had secured a deal with Workhorse to license the W15 design. The price paid, depending on which reporting you look at the time, was somewhere between $12 and $15.8 million all in, with Lordstown agreeing to kick back 1% of every sale to Workhorse, effectively royalties, as well as send Workhorse 1% of any future funding the company happened to raise. That is on top of giving Workhorse a 10% stake in Lordstown. Again, that's another huge warning bell. Then there is the reverse merger, which occurred just 1 year after GM sold the facility to Lordstown. The deal, which saw Lordstown merge with Diamond Peak Holdings Corporation to trade on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol RIDE, occurred before Lordstown had a single beta production vehicle in testing and long before it had any vehicles rolling off the production line. As part of that reverse merger, General Motors agreed to release Lordstown from its line of credit, plus provide the company an additional $25 million in cash in exchange for a shareholding in Lordstown. GM was joined by major investment firms BlackRock, Fidelity Management, Wellington Management, and Federated. While it opened at $19.25 on its first day after its official merger, Rise stock fell 32% in its first week. And while yes, historically, it was a bad week for all automakers, including Tesla, that is a massive drop for your first week of trading. Financial matters aside, another warning bell for me was the lack of access given to the media for those of us covering the endurance. Emails were regularly sent out with press releases, but questions asked off the back of those were rarely answered. There were no pre-production test drives or interviews given, and the first time we saw the truck, during a high-profile event with then Vice President Mike Pence, we only saw the outside of the truck, not the inside. That, to be honest, was the largest warning bell of all, and a sign to me that all was not well, especially as Lordstown was still maintaining last year during that reveal event that it would be producing vehicles by year's end. Even when Lordstown took an endurance to the White House for a photo opportunity with President Trump, the narrative was still mostly focused on the fact that the Lordstown endurance was entering into production that year, with hundreds of thousands of pre-orders and lots of jobs for local people. Which brings me to Hindenburg Research. A short seller, Hindenburg specializes in what it calls forensic investor research. It digs down into a company's history and shares its findings with the world, usually from a short seller position. It was Hindenburg which exposed some of the alleged misdeeds going on at Nikola Motor, including that infamous rolling down the hill incident that involved a non-functioning prototype in motion. If you want to watch the video for that, it is here if you are interested. Hindenburg dove deep into Lordstown and presented evidence that it said showed fraud at the company. The evidence suggests that while Lordstown executives had touted hundreds of thousands of pre-reservations, few of those were actually legally binding, and in some cases were paid for hand-raising by firms engaged on behalf of Lordstown to try and hype interest ahead of the company's official reverse merger. Hindenburg published reports from insiders at the company who said that the Lordstown Endurance was 3 to 4 years away from production readiness. It showed evidence of insider stock selling and shone a light on what it said were irregularities in Steve Burns' previous positions. The SEC ultimately began an investigation into Lordstown, an investigation that I believe is still ongoing. So, yeah, that's another warning sign, and the reason given by Lordstown as to why Burns and Rodriquez were resigned from the company. Take from that what you will. And this, by the way, is before we deal with any issues concerning actual vehicles. If you take into account the years of development at Workhorse, the Endurance has been in development one way or another now for 4 or more years. Right now, the company is still in its beta engineering stage, and at the start of the year was only actually working with alpha prototypes. One of those early engineering prototypes, an engineering test mule for the drivetrain, which was built into the carcass of a production pickup from a mainstream automaker, happened to catch fire while out on its first public highway test drive. Then there was a rally spec version of the Endurance, built specifically for the Score San Felipe 250 rally, which pulled out just 40 miles into the 280-mile race. There have also been questions raised, time and time again, about the in-wheel motors that Lordstown is using in the Endurance. Produced by a company called LFA from Slovenia in Europe, skeptics have questioned how having the unsprung mass of the in-wheel motors will affect vehicle handling and performance, as well as questioned the lifespan of the motors themselves. Lordstown hasn't said a whole lot about these wheels, but I can say that having experienced the LFA wheels in the Aptera Noir Alpha prototype as a passenger, I should make a disclaimer, I am a reservation holder for the Aptera, I did find the wheels to be capable. That said, there is a big difference between in-wheel motors in an ultra-lightweight, very aerodynamic vehicle and a full-size work-oriented pickup truck, so I don't want to dwell too much on this technical aspect without having more first-hand experience to share. Which leaves us where? A pickup truck company with a factory but no series production intent vehicle, and likely no way to make that happen right now. A company with stock that might be rallying a little after yesterday's news, but is nearly 50% down year to date. A company that has very little money left and has said as much, but is giving its former CEO and CFO not insignificant golden parachutes, while the interim CFO it has just appointed gets to charge $1,200 an hour and bring in any of her existing employees as consultants as she deems necessary. It doesn't look good. Right now, Lordstown is still technically operational, but having spoken to several people who work in management consultancy industries, they all say the same thing. It feels, very much so in fact, like Lordstown has pushed out the executives its board believes got it into this mess, and it's now paying through the nose to try and figure out if anything can be salvaged. If not, then we should expect the company to be carved up, its assets sold on, or bankruptcy declared. Finally, well, I think the Ford F-150 Lightning Pro, revealed last month, with a starting price of $40,000 is the last nail in Lordstown's coffin. Fleet operators might pick a startup to supply them with electric vehicles if that is all that is available. But if there is a mainstream brand with an established reputation and nationwide sales and service already in operation, and it comes along and announces an electric pickup truck, well, I know most fleet operators will send their money there instead, and those non-binding deposits that Lordstown has could disappear very quickly. 4 years ago, the electric pickup truck market was a wide open space with plenty of room for a fresh face. But fast forward to today and its segment is starting to look pretty crowded, with the F-150 Lightning, the Cybertruck, the Rivian R1T and GM's plan for an EV version of the Silverado all looking like promising vehicles that we expect to see enter into series production. If things had moved along more quickly for Lordstown, we might be able to add the insurance to the list. But right now, I seriously doubt it. So there you have it, Lordstown is most certainly on life support. And frankly, I think there's a funeral to plan. That's it for today. Please do hit subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't yet, as it stops YouTube from not sharing our content. And make sure that the bell is still hit, because sometimes it turns it off. And make sure subscribed to Take Two and Transport Evolved Shorts. We'll have links below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patron supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, that's Andrew Martin, Guido Drahoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Regine Fellows, Carl Hodgson, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ueda and Tesla in the Gong, and our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month patron supporters, John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin and Ian. If you would like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin and Ko-fi. And by the way, we are close to our 1000th Patreon. We're trying to do something special for that. You can chat with the team and TE fans over at Discord, and if you'd like to buy some TE swag, just head over to our Redbubble store. Our new Pride designs, like this one, are now in stock, and all proceeds from selling them goes this month to the Trevor Project. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!